Welcome back. New 2024 general election polling out of Pennsylvania shows President Joe Biden leading Donald Trump in that key battleground state. The recent Susquehanna Polling and Research survey shows the president up by 8 points, increasing his margin over Trump since the firm's last survey back in September. The finding is consistent with a Quinnipiac poll of Pennsylvania voters from earlier this month that showed Biden improving his standing since October. And for the Democratic candidate, Pennsylvania, likely the most important state on the map. Hard to find a path to 270 without it. Joining us now, communication strategist and former aide to House Speakers Ryan and Boehner, Brendan Buck. He's now an MSNBC political analyst. Brendan, good to see you. So let's talk about Trump and some of the warning signs that may also be emerging from his decisive victory last night. Let's be clear, he did win by 11 points. This poll in Pennsylvania gets to some of them, as well as his showing with independents last night in New Hampshire. Give us your analysis.
Sure. I mean, well, Donald Trump, Pennsylvania obviously is something that Joe Biden has to win. As you mentioned, there's no real way a Democrat's going to win without Pennsylvania. There are a lot of places, though, where Donald Trump is actually showing a lot of strength compared to just 4 years ago. My home state of Georgia, which was famously unkind to Donald Trump, is now showing him consistently beating Joe Biden. So you can find spots where he's doing better and where he's doing worse. What we're going to ultimately have here is a campaign where people are not really excited about either candidate. And we had this in 2016 where people did not care for Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. And Trump did a better job of making her the unpleasant choice. Joe Biden is going to have to make Donald Trump to be unacceptable. There's a lot of people who don't like him, but there's a lot of people who are really unimpressed with Joe Biden's record as well. And the question is, who is going to make the other person the unacceptable choice, not just the one that you don't care for? And I think that's ultimately what's going to decide what happens in November.
And it does seem like the general election has begun. As we documented earlier, the Biden team shifting senior White House aides to Wilmington. They're focusing squarely on Donald Trump now. Trump looking to take on Biden and ignore Nikki Haley. Trump, again, it's an 11-point win last night. He earned around 50% in both Iowa and New Hampshire. Do you think there's a concern, though, that he didn't secure a larger share of the GOP electorate as he sort of bills himself almost as an incumbent?
Yeah, certainly this is not the showing you would want if you dominated the party in a way a normal candidate, a normal incumbent does. However, this is still very much Donald Trump's party, and I think Nikki Haley is finding that. New Hampshire was uniquely positioned for her to be able to have a good showing. And as we move on, there are very few states that are going to behave in the way that New Hampshire did. There are a lot of Republicans who are ready to turn the page on Donald Trump. Whether they are willing to vote for Joe Biden is another question. And I think that's really what is going to be the most interesting thing about Nikki Haley's decision that she has in front of her. Is she willing to really run a campaign for the next month or two, or however long it is, that undermines Donald Trump? She's going to be facing intense pressure within the party to drop out, allow the party to coalesce. Joe Biden is already using her against Donald Trump. Is she willing to risk her standing in the party, risk whatever future she may have in the party, to really undermine him and tell a lot of those skeptical Republican voters that Donald Trump is just not worth it? And I think that could really have an impact in November in the same way that we talk about a lot of these third parties.
And Brendan, let's stay on that very topic for a moment more. Haley pulled a lot of her punches, throughout the campaign, hit Trump harder in recent days up there in New Hampshire. As you talk to Republicans and just your own sense of it, what do you think she is going to do? Is she going to stay in this or bow out?
I'm surprised. I would be surprised if she stuck out through South Carolina. One, because, as I said, the upside or the downside risk is pretty immense. And I think she's going to start feeling the walls closing in on her pretty quickly when she realizes there's no real path. But, at the same time, there may be money that can keep her floating out there. She may not care about her future in the party. She may not realize that she has a future in the party. She may think this is more important than any future. And that would, frankly, be surprising because she has not run a campaign that would indicate that to this point. As you were discussing with Eugene, I absolutely believe that she ran a campaign just hoping that she would be there to pick up the pieces if he fell apart. It's very little too late at this point.
Yeah, she's running until she's not. We'll see if that changes. MSNBC political analyst Brendan Buck, thank you so very much for joining us this morning.